The return. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the hum of the city outside his apartment blending with the soft buzz of his tablet screen. He hadn't thought about her in years, the alien woman who had once saved his life. It felt like a strange dream now, something his mind made up to escape the monotony of everyday life. But deep down, he knew it wasn't a dream. He had the scar to prove it. The knock at the door shattered his thoughts. It wasn't just a knock. It was a series of rapid, uneven taps, almost like a code. Ethan hesitated, his pulse quickening. Visitors weren't common here, especially not late at night. "Who is it?" he called, his voice steady but wary. Silence. Then, "Ethan, it's me." That voice. He hadn't heard it in years, but it was unmistakable. Low, melodic, and layered with an accent that didn't belong to Earth. His heart raced as he crossed the room and unlocked the door. Standing there, drenched from the rain, was the alien woman. Her silver hair clung to her face, and her golden eyes glowed faintly in the dim hallway light. She was taller than most humans, her posture always rigid, like a soldier ready for battle. But tonight, she looked desperate. "You?" Ethan struggled to find words. "You're alive." She pushed past him into the apartment, shutting the door behind her. "No time for questions," she said, her voice urgent. "They're coming." Ethan blinked, still trying to process her sudden appearance. "Who's coming? What's going on?" She turned to him, and for the first time, he noticed the gash on her arm, seeping this silvery blue liquid. "I need your help," she said, her voice softening. "I didn't want to drag you into this, but I had no choice." "You disappeared," Ethan said, his tone sharper than he intended. "No explanation, no goodbye. And now you just show up, bleeding, and expect me to." "I saved your life," she interrupted, her golden eyes locking onto his. "And now I need you to save mine." Ethan closed his mouth, guilt mingling with his frustration. He owed her, that much was true. "Fine," he said, grabbing a towel and some first aid supplies from a nearby cabinet. "Sit down. Let me take a look at that." She hesitated but eventually sat on the worn couch. As Ethan cleaned her wound, he noticed the strange patterns etched into her skin, faint but intricate, like a map. He'd seen them before years ago, but now they seemed more pronounced, almost glowing. "What happened?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. "Why are you here?" She winced as he applied pressure to the wound. "Do you remember what I told you about the war? My people. We were losing. I left to fight, to protect what little we had left." "And?" Ethan prompted. "And we failed," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The enemy is stronger than we ever imagined. They've taken our worlds, enslaved our people. And now," she looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Now they're coming here." Ethan froze. "Earth? Why?" She hesitated, as if deciding how much to tell him. "There's something here they want, something they think I've hidden." "Have you?" he asked. She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Ethan sighed, leaning back. "This is insane," he muttered. "Why come to me? What can I do?" "You're resourceful," she said simply. "You survived when most wouldn't have. And I trust you." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He wanted to argue, to push back against the insanity of the situation, but the look in her eyes stopped him. She wasn't just desperate, she was scared. "What's the plan?" he asked, his voice steadier now. She reached into the pouch at her side and pulled out a small metallic object. It looked like a sphere, smooth and featureless, but as she pressed it into his hand, it began to hum softly. "This is what they're after," she said. "It's a key, to what I don't know. But if they get it—" She didn't finish, but the weight of her words was clear. Ethan stared at the sphere, feeling its subtle vibrations against his palm. "Why not destroy it?" "I've tried," she said, shaking her head. "It can't be destroyed. And even if it could, the knowledge it contains, it's too important. Ethan nodded slowly, his mind racing. So what do we do? She stood, her movements sharp despite her injuries. We run, hide, and figure out how to stop them. Great, Ethan said, grabbing his jacket. Just another normal night. As they stepped into the rain, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change forever. Again, the warning. Ethan stood in his dimly lit apartment, staring at the sphere resting in his palm. The alien woman, whom he still only knew as Sarai, was pacing back and forth. Her tall, commanding figure seemed smaller now, weighed down by exhaustion and fear. Outside, the city hummed with its usual life, oblivious to the danger that was quietly approaching. You can't just drop something like this on me and expect me to roll with it, Ethan said, setting the sphere on the table. Start talking. What exactly is happening? Sarai stopped and turned to face him, her golden eyes piercing through the shadows. Do you remember the stories I told you about the HFY Dominion? Ethan nodded. The warmongering alien empire. Yeah, I remember. Didn't you say they were busy conquering your side of the galaxy? They were, she said, her voice sharp. But their ambitions have grown. They'd been expanding faster than anyone predicted, consuming entire systems. And now they've set their sights on this sector. Ethan's brow furrowed. Why Earth? What could they possibly want here? Sarai hesitated. For a moment, she seemed uncertain, as if weighing whether to tell him the truth. Finally, she sighed and gestured to the sphere. It's because of that. That key you're holding. It's not just a tool. It's a map. A map to a weapon that could tip the balance of power in the galaxy. Ethan's mouth went dry. He glanced at the sphere, its surface now shimmering faintly in the dim light. You're telling me Earth is sitting on some kind of superweapon? Not just any weapon, Sarai said, stepping closer. The Eterna Core, a relic of an ancient race. The HFY believe it's buried somewhere on this planet. They'll do whatever it takes to find it, even if it means burning your world to ashes. The weight of her words sank into him like a stone. And you brought this here. You're the reason they're coming. I didn't have a choice, she snapped, her voice trembling. If the HFY get their hands on it, there won't be anything left. Not here. Not anywhere. Ethan stared at her, trying to process the enormity of what she was saying. So what's the plan? We can't exactly call the government and tell them aliens are coming. No, Sarai said. We can't trust anyone. The HFY have spies, collaborators. They've infiltrated governments on other worlds before. The moment we involve Earth's authorities, it's over. Great, Ethan muttered, rubbing his temples. So it's just the two of us against an intergalactic empire. No big deal. Sarai smirked faintly, but the humor didn't reach her eyes. I've faced worse odds. Ethan shook his head. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? Back when we first met. I didn't know you'd be involved, Sarai admitted. The Eterna Core was supposed to stay hidden, but something changed. The HFY found clues, and they've been tracking me ever since. I had to come back. You're the only one I trust to help me. Ethan leaned against the wall, his mind racing. This is insane. What exactly do you need me to do? Sarai stepped closer, her expression softening. I need you to help me find the Eterna Core before they do. You know this planet better than I do. You can move unnoticed. And you've survived worse than most humans could handle. Flattering, Ethan said dryly. But let's say we do find this thing. What then? How do we stop them? Sarai hesitated again, and that brief pause sent a chill down Ethan's spine. We destroy it. You just said it couldn't be destroyed. I said I couldn't destroy it, Sarai corrected. But if we find the core, there's a chance we can activate its failsafe. It would wipe out everything in its vicinity, including the HFY fleet. And Earth? Ethan asked, his voice rising. What happens to Earth? Sarah looked away. The failsafe's range is unpredictable. Ethan slammed his fist against the wall. Unbelievable. You're asking me to help you trigger a bomb that could destroy my entire planet. I'm asking you to help save your planet. Sarai shot back, her voice filled with desperation. Do you think the HFY will spare anyone if they win? They'll strip this world bare and leave it a lifeless husk. If we don't act, billions will die anyway. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging between them. Ethan felt his anger simmering beneath the surface, but he couldn't ignore the logic in what she was saying. He hated it. Every part of him hated it, but she wasn't wrong. Fine, he said at last, his voice low. I'll help you. But if we're doing this, we're finding a way to stop them without blowing up Earth. Deal. Sarai nodded, her expression softening with relief. Deal. A sudden noise outside broke the tension. Both of them froze, their eyes darting to the window. Ethan moved cautiously to the edge and peered out. In the distance, a dark, sleek craft hovered silently in the night sky. Its lights were faint, but its menacing silhouette was unmistakable. They found us, Sarai whispered. Ethan grabbed the sphere from the table and stuffed it into his bag. We need to go. Now. Sarai nodded, already moving toward the door. Stay close, and whatever happens, don't let them take the sphere. As they stepped into the cold night, Ethan couldn't help but wonder if he just made the biggest mistake of his life. The enemy. The air was cold, sharp, and filled with tension as Ethan and Sarai moved through the shadowy back streets of the city. Every sound, a distant car engine, the faint murmur of voices, felt amplified, like a threat lurking just beyond sight. Ethan clutched his bag tightly, the sphere inside humming faintly against his side. Its subtle vibration felt like a ticking clock. Where are we even going? Ethan whispered, glancing over his shoulder for the 100th time. His paranoia was growing, and the eerie silence of their pursuers didn't help. Somewhere safe, Sarai replied, her voice barely audible. She walked ahead, her golden eyes scanning the streets like a predator searching for danger. I have contacts here, people who can help us. People? Ethan raised an eyebrow. You mean aliens? Sarai stopped suddenly and turned to face him, her expression serious. Not all aliens want Earth destroyed, Ethan. Some of us fight to protect worlds like yours. Remember that. Before Ethan could respond, a strange sound cut through the air. It wasn't loud, more like a low-frequency hum that made his skin crawl. Sarai's posture stiffened immediately. They've deployed a scout, she said, her voice tense. Stay close. What kind of scout? Ethan asked, his heart pounding. As if in answer, the hum grew louder, and a dark, insect-like drone emerged from the shadows above them. Its sleek black surface seemed to absorb the light around it, and its many glowing red eyes scanned the area with terrifying precision. It moved unnaturally, hovering silently one moment and darting forward the next, like a predator toying with its prey. That kind, Sarai muttered, pulling Ethan into an alley. Please tell me you have a plan, Ethan said, pressing himself against the wall. Sarai reached into her belt and pulled out a small device. It looked like a metal rod, no bigger than a flashlight. This will disrupt its sensors, but only for a few seconds. When I give the signal, run. Ethan's stomach dropped. Run. What about you? I'll meet you, she said firmly. But if it catches us both, we're done. Keep the sphere safe. That's your only job. Before Ethan could argue, the drone's red eyes locked onto their hiding spot. A piercing, mechanical screech echoed through the alley, and the drone began to descend. Go, Sarai shouted, activating the rod. A burst of static energy rippled through the air, and the drone faltered, its movements jerky and chaotic. Ethan didn't wait to see what happened next. He bolted down the alley, clutching the bag like his life depended on it. His legs burned as he ran, the cold air cutting into his lungs. Behind him, He could hear the drone's screeches growing louder, regaining its focus. He didn't dare look back. Turn left. Saray's voice echoed from somewhere above him. He glanced up to see her scaling a fire escape with inhuman speed, her movements fluid and precise. Keep going. Don't stop. Ethan followed her directions, weaving through the labyrinth of alleys and side streets. The city blurred around him, a maze of steel and concrete. The drone was relentless, its hum growing closer with every step. Finally, he stumbled into an open courtyard surrounded by towering buildings. There was nowhere to hide. Panic set in as the drone appeared, its sleek form hovering just above him. Its red eyes locked onto him like a predator eyeing its kill. Ethan. Saray's voice snapped him out of his fear. She was on a rooftop above him, holding a strange weapon, a crossbow-like device with glowing blue bolts. Duck. He didn't hesitate, throwing himself to the ground. He felt the rush of air as one of the bolts shot past him. It struck the drone with a sharp crack, and the machine erupted in a burst of sparks. It twitched violently before collapsing to the ground, lifeless. Ethan stayed on the ground, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. Sarai dropped down from the rooftop with a grace that seemed almost impossible. She offered him a hand. "You're alive," she said, a hint of relief in her voice. "Barely," Ethan muttered, taking her hand and pulling himself up. "Please tell me that's the only one." Sarai didn't answer immediately. She crouched by the remains of the drone, her expression dark as she examined it. "It's a scout," she said finally. "If it didn't report back, they'll send more." "More?" Ethan's voice cracked. "How many more?" "Enough to level this entire block," Sarai said grimly. She stood, her golden eyes meeting his. "We don't have much time. They know we're here." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. "What do we do now? We can't outrun them forever." "We won't," Sarai said, her voice calm but firm. "We need to get off the grid. There's a safe house not far from here. My contact will have what we need." "And who is this contact?" Ethan asked, narrowing his eyes. "A smuggler," Sarai said, already moving. "One of the best, but we'll have to move quickly." Ethan followed her, his body aching, but his mind sharper than ever. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. If this was just a scout, what would the full force of the HFY look like? As they disappeared into the night, the faint hum of more drones echoed in the distance, a chilling reminder of the enemy closing in. Ethan clenched his fists, determination replacing his fear. He wasn't sure how, but he was going to survive this. And maybe, just maybe, save his planet in the process. The artifact. The safe house wasn't what Ethan expected. Tucked beneath the city's industrial district, it was an abandoned subway station that had been repurposed into a hidden refuge. Dim lights flickered along the cracked walls, casting long shadows that made the space feel more like a tomb than a sanctuary. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of rust and mildew. Sarai moved quickly, her every step purposeful. Ethan trailed behind her, still clutching the bag with the sphere. His legs ached from the relentless pace, but his curiosity kept him alert. "This is the safe house?" Ethan asked, his voice echoing slightly. "I was expecting something a little less creepy." "Creepy is good," Sarai replied without looking back. "Creepy keeps people away." Ahead of them, a figure emerged from the shadows. A man, or at least something that resembled one. He was tall and thin, with skin that shimmered faintly like polished stone. His eyes glowed an eerie blue, and intricate patterns ran across his face and arms, as though someone had etched his body with glowing ink. "Sarai," the man said, his voice smooth and deep. "You're late." "Blame the HFY," Sarai replied, her tone curt. "Is everything ready, Kal?" Kale nodded, his glowing eyes flicking toward Ethan. "And who's this?" "Your new apprentice." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but Sarai cut him off. "He's with me. That's all you need to know." Kale raised an eyebrow, but said nothing more. He stepped aside, revealing a concealed doorway behind him. "Everything's set up. You'll find what you need in the vault." Sarai nodded and led Ethan through the doorway. They entered a small, dimly lit chamber filled with crates, weapons, and strange devices Ethan couldn't begin to identify. In the center of the room stood a table, and on it rested a large rectangular device that pulsed faintly with blue light. "That's it," Sarai said, walking toward the device. "The artifact's beacon." Ethan set the bag down and frowned. "Wait, I thought the sphere was the artifact." "No," Sarai said, picking up the device. "The sphere is the key. This is the beacon. Together, they'll lead us to the Eterna core." Ethan crossed his arms. "And you're sure this thing is even on Earth? What if the Ashfar are chasing a myth?" "It's not a myth," Sarai said firmly. She placed the sphere into a circular slot on the beacon. The device whirred to life, its blue light intensifying as a holographic map projected above it. The map displayed Earth, but with layers of additional detail, hidden structures, underground networks, and energy signatures that didn't belong. Ethan stared at the map, his disbelief giving way to awe. "What is all this?" "Remnants of the ancients," Sarai said. "They were here long before your species evolved. The core is buried in one of their sanctuaries, hidden deep beneath your planet's surface." Ethan leaned closer, his eyes scanning the map. A bright point of light pulsed near the center of the projection. "Is that it? The core?" "Most likely," Sarai said. "But it won't be unguarded. The ancients were paranoid. Their sanctuaries are filled with traps, defenses designed to keep intruders out." "Fantastic," Ethan muttered. "So not only do we have to beat the Ashfar to it, but we also have to survive an ancient death maze." Sarai smirked faintly. "That's the spirit." Kale entered the room, his glowing eyes narrowing as he looked at the map. "You're running out of time," he said. "The Ashfar are calming the city. It won't take them long to figure out where you're headed." Sarai nodded. "Then we move now." She turned to Ethan. "Are you ready?" Ethan hesitated, his mind racing. He wasn't ready. None of this felt real. But he didn't have a choice. If they failed, Earth was doomed. "Let's do it," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Sarai grabbed a compact weapon from one of the crates and tossed it to him. "You might need this." Ethan caught it, examining the sleek, unfamiliar design. "What is it?" "A pulse disruptor," Sarai said. "Point and shoot. It's non-lethal, but it'll knock out most enemies long enough for us to get away." "Great," Ethan said, tucking it into his jacket. "Non-lethal. Just what I need against an alien death squad." Kale stepped forward, his expression unusually serious. "One more thing," he said, holding out a small metallic disc. "This is a cloaking device. It'll mask your presence from the Ashfar sensors, but only for a short time. Use it wisely." Sarai took the disc and nodded. "Thank you, Kale, for everything." Kale's glowing eyes softened. "Be careful, Sarai. If the Ashfar catch you—" "They won't," Sarai said, her tone resolute. She turned to Ethan. "Let's go." As they left the safe house and stepped into the night, the weight of their mission settled over Ethan like a heavy cloak. The holographic map glowed faintly from Sarai's device, guiding their path. Every step brought them closer to the Eterna core, and to the Ashfar. Ethan glanced at Sarai, her expression unreadable as she led the way. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than she was telling him. But for now, he pushed the doubts aside. Survival came first. Answers could wait. In the distance, a low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. The Ashfar were coming, and the race for the Eterna core had officially begun. The betrayal. The underground sanctuary was colder than Ethan expected. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the faint metallic tang of ancient machinery. Every step he and Sarai took echoed eerily, as if the walls themselves were alive and listening. The holographic map projected from Sarai's beacon flickered in the dim light, guiding them deeper into the labyrinth. "This place feels wrong," Ethan muttered, gripping the pulse disruptor tightly. The weapon's weight in his hand was oddly comforting, though he wasn't sure it would be much use if something went sideways. "It should feel wrong," Sarai said, her voice low. "The ancients built these sanctuaries to keep intruders out. If you're not supposed to be here, you'll feel it." "Great," Ethan said, glancing over his shoulder. "And what about the HFY? What's stopping them from walking right in?" Sarai stopped abruptly, turning to face him. Her golden eyes glimmered faintly in the pale light. "The HFY don't fear traps or sanctuaries. They destroy everything in their path. That's why we need to move faster." Ethan swallowed hard and nodded. The tension between them had been building since they left the safe house. Sarai had grown quieter, more withdrawn, and her urgency felt almost manic now. Something wasn't right, but Ethan couldn't put his finger on it. They reached a massive chamber, its walls covered in glowing symbols that pulsed with an otherworldly energy. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it was a crystalline object, sleek and shimmering, its surface swirling with light. "The Eterna Core," Sarai whispered, her voice reverent. Ethan's breath caught. The artifact looked impossibly delicate, yet he could feel its power even from where he stood. "That's it?" he asked, stepping closer. "Don't touch it," Sarai snapped, her tone sharp. Ethan froze, looking at her in surprise. Okay, he said, holding up his hands. "No touching." "Got it." Sarai approached the pedestal carefully, her eyes scanning the room for traps. The ancients would have layered defenses here. Anything that moves the core without authorization could trigger a failsafe. "And what happens if the failsafe goes off?" Ethan asked. "We die," Sarai said bluntly. "Great," Ethan muttered, staying as far back as he could. Sarai reached into her pouch and pulled out the sphere. As she brought it close to the core, the pedestal lit up, and the symbols on the walls began to shift and change. A deep, resonant hum filled the chamber, vibrating in Ethan's chest. "It's reacting," Sarai said, her voice tight. "This is it. We're close." Ethan's relief was short-lived. A sudden noise, a faint click, like a switch being flipped, echoed through the chamber. Both of them froze. "What was that?" Ethan whispered. Sarai's expression darkened. "We're not alone." Before either of them could react, a sharp beam of light shot through the room, slamming into the pedestal. The hum of the core faltered, and the glowing symbols on the walls dimmed. Ethan spun around, his heart racing. From the shadows emerged three figures, their sleek black armor reflecting the faint light. Their movements were precise, almost mechanical, and their glowing red eyes marked them unmistakably as HFY. "You've led us right to it," one of them said, their voice distorted and hollow. Sarai stepped in front of Ethan, her stance defensive. "Stay back," she said, her voice steadied despite the odds. The HFY soldier tilted their head, as if amused. "You think you can stop us, Sarai? We've been tracking you since you left your homeworld." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Wait," he said, stepping forward. "How do they know your name?" "Because she led us here," the soldier said, their red eyes locking onto Ethan. "You didn't really think she came back to Earth just to save you, did you?" Ethan turned to Sarai, his chest tightening. "What are they talking about?" Sarai didn't answer immediately. Her jaw tightened, and for the first time, she looked away. "Ethan, I can explain." "You used me," Ethan said, his voice rising. "You needed me to get to the core. That's why you came back." "It's not what you think," Sarai said quickly. "I had no choice. The HFY would have found it eventually. I needed someone who could help me navigate this planet, someone I could trust." "Trust?" Ethan laughed bitterly. "You lied to me this whole time. What else aren't you telling me?" "Enough," the soldier interrupted, raising their weapon. "Hand over the core, Sarai, and we'll spare the human." Sarai's golden eyes hardened. "You know I can't do that." "Then you've chosen death," the soldier said, their voice cold. The room erupted into chaos. Sarai moved with lightning speed, pulling Ethan behind the pedestal as the HFY opened fire. Blue energy bolts ricocheted off the walls, shattering pieces of the ancient structure. Ethan fumbled with his disruptor, his hands shaking as he tried to aim. "Ethan, get to the core," Sarai shouted, returning fire with her own weapon. "What? Are you insane?" Ethan yelled back. "Just do it," she said, her voice filled with urgency. Ethan gritted his teeth and crawled toward the pedestal, the energy bolts whizzing past him. His heart pounded as he reached for the core, its swirling light reflecting in his wide eyes. The moment his fingers brushed its surface, the entire room seemed to shift. The glowing symbols flared to life, and a deafening roar filled the air. Ethan was thrown back as the core emitted a blinding pulse of energy, knocking everyone off their feet. When the light faded, he opened his eyes to see the HFY soldiers lying motionless on the ground. Sarai staggered to her feet, her face pale. "You activated it," she said, her voice trembling. "What just happened?" Ethan asked, his head spinning. "The core protected itself," Sarai said. She looked at him, her expression a mix of relief and something else. Guilt. "But now it knows you." Ethan frowned. "Knows me? What does that mean?" Sarai didn't answer. She looked at the core, then back at Ethan. "We need to leave. Now." As they fled the chamber, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that Sarai's betrayal was only the beginning. The sacrifice. The world above was in chaos. The once dim skies over the city were now alive with streaks of fire and light. HFY ships, sleek and ominous, darted through the clouds like predators, their weapons raining destruction on anything that moved. Buildings burned, sirens wailed, and the streets were filled with terrified screams. Ethan and Sarai emerged from the underground sanctuary into this nightmare. The Eterna core clutched tightly in Ethan's hands. Its swirling energy seemed almost alive, pulsing in rhythm with his racing heartbeat. Sarai's face was pale, her golden eyes scanning the chaos above them. "They've already started," she muttered, her voice tight with urgency. "The HFY aren't waiting for us to hand over the core. They're going to tear this planet apart." "Then why are we running?" Ethan snapped, his voice cracking with fear and frustration. "You said this thing could stop them. Why not use it?" "Because we're not ready," Sarai said sharply, grabbing his arm. "The core's power isn't something you can just unleash. If we activate it without control, it could destroy everything, including this planet." Ethan yanked his arm away, glaring at her. "And if we do nothing, they'll destroy the planet anyway. What's the point of running if we're all dead?" Sarai hesitated, her expression torn. For the first time, she looked uncertain, almost vulnerable. "There's a failsafe," she said finally. "A way to use the core's power without triggering its full destructive force. But it requires a catalyst, a living connection, to stabilize the energy." Ethan frowned. "A living connection? What does that mean?" "It means someone has to bond with the core," Sarai said quietly, "to channel its power, to contain it." Ethan's stomach dropped. "And by someone, you mean?" "Yes," Sarai said, meeting his gaze. "Me." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Ethan felt a surge of anger and disbelief. "That's your plan? Sacrifice yourself to save the planet? That's insane, Sarai. There has to be another way." "There isn't," she said, her voice firm. "The core's power is too great for a human to handle. Your body wouldn't survive the process. But I've been trained for this. My people." She stopped, her voice breaking slightly. "We knew this might happen. I've always known it might end this way." Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. The alien woman who had saved his life, who had risked everything to protect his planet, was now willing to throw her life away. And the worst part was, he didn't have a better idea. Before he could respond, a deafening roar filled the air. One of the HFY ships descended from the clouds, its massive form casting a shadow over the street. Its weapons glowed ominously as it locked onto their position. "Move," Sarai shouted, shoving Ethan toward cover. They dove behind the wreckage of an overturned vehicle as the ship opened fire. The ground shook, and debris rained down around them. Ethan clutched the core tightly, its energy flaring in response to the danger. "We can't outrun them," Ethan yelled over the noise. "What do we do?" Sarai didn't answer immediately. She peered over the edge of the wreckage, her jaw tightening. "We make our stand here." "Are you kidding me?" Ethan snapped. "Against that, we'll be vaporized." "Not if you trust me," Sarai said, her voice steady despite the chaos. She placed her hand over his, her touch surprisingly gentle. "The core will protect you. It knows you now, but I need you to believe in me." Ethan looked into her golden eyes, searching for something. Doubt, fear, anything that would give him a reason to say no. But all he saw was determination. Reluctantly, he nodded. "Fine. What do you need me to do?" "Keep them distracted," Sarai said, rising to her feet. "I'll handle the core." Before Ethan could protest, she stepped out from behind the wreckage, her weapon drawn. The HFY ship immediately focused on her, its weapons firing in rapid succession. Sarai moved like a blur, dodging and weaving with an agility that seemed almost supernatural. Ethan took a deep breath and followed her lead, firing his pulse disruptor at the ship. The weapon's blasts were small, barely enough to scorch its armor. But they served their purpose. The ship's attention wavered, its firepower divided between him and Sarai. "Now," Sarai shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Ethan turned to see her standing in the middle of the street, the Eterna core hovering between her outstretched hands. Its energy flared brighter than ever, illuminating her face in a halo of light. She looked both ethereal and terrifying, as if she had become one with the artifact. The HFY ship hesitated, its movements slowing. The core's energy pulsed outward, creating a barrier of light that surrounded them. Ethan felt the ground vibrate beneath his feet as the energy grew stronger, reaching its peak. "Sarai, what are you doing?" he yelled, his voice filled with panic. "This is the only way," she said, her voice calm. She looked at him one last time, a faint smile on her lips. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." Before he could respond, the core's energy exploded outward in a blinding wave of light. The HFY ship was consumed instantly, its massive form disintegrating into nothingness. The wave continued to expand, swallowing everything in its path. But it left Ethan untouched, a bubble of calm in the eye of the storm. When the light finally faded, the streak was silent. The HFY were gone, their ships obliterated, but so was Sarai. Ethan stood alone, the Eterna core now dormant in his hands. Tears blurred his vision as he stared at the empty space where Sarai had been. She had saved the planet, but at the cost of her own life. And yet, as he looked at the core, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Sarai had given everything to protect Earth, but the fight wasn't over. The HFY would come back, and when they did, Ethan knew he would be ready. For her, and for humanity. The true purpose. The aftermath of the battle was eerily quiet. The air still crackled faintly with residual energy from the Eterna core's devastating pulse, but the once chaotic skies were now clear. HFY ships had vanished, either destroyed or retreating. The city was in ruins, its towering skyscrapers reduced to smoking husks. And yet, despite the devastation, Earth had survived. Ethan stood in the center of the wreckage, his grip on the dormant core tightening. It felt cold now, lifeless compared to the vibrant, pulsing energy it had displayed moments ago. Sarai's sacrifice replayed in his mind, a memory that felt too sharp and real to process yet. She was gone. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. "You did this," he whispered to the core, his voice trembling. "You took her." The core didn't respond, of course, but as Ethan stared at it, he thought he saw something. a faint shimmer within its crystalline structure. He shook his head, dismissing it as exhaustion. The past few days had been an unrelenting nightmare, and now he was left alone to pick up the pieces. A faint sound pulled him from his thoughts. It was subtle at first, like a distant hum, but it grew steadily louder. Ethan tensed, his hand reaching for the pulse disruptor still strapped to his side. "Not again," he muttered, scanning the skies for any sign of HFY reinforcements. But the sound wasn't coming from above. It was coming from the core. Before Ethan could react, the artifact flared to life, bathing the area in a soft, golden light. The symbols etched into its surface glowed faintly, and a familiar voice echoed in his mind. "Ethan." His heart stopped. It was Sarai's voice. "Sarai," he said aloud, his voice cracking. "How?" The core's light intensified, and an image began to take shape before him. It wasn't solid, more like a projection, but it was unmistakably Sarai. Her golden eyes met his, filled with a warmth he hadn't seen before. "I don't have much time," she said, her voice clear but tinged with an otherworldly echo. "The core's energy allowed me to leave a fragment of myself behind." "A fragment?" Ethan repeated, struggling to comprehend. "What does that even mean? Are you alive?" Sarai's expression softened, a sad smile crossing her lips. "Not in the way you know me. My physical body is gone, but part of my consciousness remains within the core. I knew this might happen. It was the only way to ensure the core's power wouldn't be lost or misused." Ethan's mind raced. "You planned this. From the start, you knew you weren't coming back." "I hoped it wouldn't come to this," she admitted. "But the core required a bond to stabilize its energy. Without that connection, its power would have consumed everything, including you." Ethan felt a surge of guilt and anger. "You didn't have to do this alone. We could have found another way." "There was no other way," Sarai said gently. "But my sacrifice wasn't just for Earth. It was for something much greater." "What could be greater than saving an entire planet?" Ethan asked, his voice rising. "The truth," Sarai said, her tone growing serious. "The core is more than a weapon. It's a repository of knowledge, a record of the ancients and their place in the galaxy. It holds the key to understanding the HFY's true motives and the power to stop them." Ethan stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "You're saying this war isn't just about domination?" "No," Sarai said, shaking her head. "The HFY aren't driven by greed or conquest alone. They're searching for something buried in the ancients' history. The core holds that history, but unlocking it requires a guide. That's why it chose you." "Me?" Ethan said, his voice laced with disbelief. "I'm just a guy who was in the wrong place at the wrong time." "You're more than that," Sarai said, her gaze unwavering. "The core saw something in you, something even I didn't fully understand. You're resourceful, resilient, and most importantly, you care. That's what makes you the perfect guardian." "Guardian?" Ethan repeated, his stomach sinking. "What does that even mean?" "It means the fight isn't over," Sarai said. "The HFY will return, and they won't stop until they've unlocked the secrets of the ancients. You have to protect the core, Ethan. Keep it safe. Learn from it. Use its knowledge to prepare for what's coming." Ethan's head spun. The weight of her words felt unbearable. "I can't do this alone," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You won't be alone," Sarai said, her voice softening. "I'll be here, within the core. A part of me will always be with you." Tears blurred Ethan's vision as he looked at her. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are," Sarai said firmly. "You've already proven that. Trust yourself, Ethan. Humanity's strength lies in its ability to adapt, to rise above even the darkest moments. You can do this." The golden light surrounding her began to fade, and Ethan's chest tightened. "Wait, don't go. I'm not ready." "You are," Sarai said, her voice growing fainter. "Remember, Ethan, this is only the beginning." And then she was gone. The core's light dimmed, its energy retreating back into its crystalline structure. Ethan stood there in the silence, the weight of his new responsibility pressing down on him. He looked up at the sky, now clear and quiet. Somewhere out there, the HFY were regrouping, planning their next move. But for now, Earth was safe, and Ethan knew what he had to do. As he walked away from the wreckage, the Eterna core clutched tightly in his hands. He made a silent promise to Sarai and to himself. He would protect the core. He would uncover its secrets. And when the HFY returned, he would be ready. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning.